Okay, Chair, go ahead. We're now live on YouTube.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. I hope my fumbling around weren't terrible. We will kick off with the agenda. I don't think it's not going to be very easy for us to all introduce ourselves, but just to say, if you need to ask questions or anything like that, if you try to raise your virtual hand, I will try to see it. But if I haven't seen it, I'm sure Paul will look out as well. But do feel free to unmute yourself and shout at me. That's perfectly fine. So we'll go on to apologies. I've got Lindsay Barnett, Lee Hughes has been substituted by Annabelle Moore, Nikki Lamond and Ian Massey may join late. Any other apologies?
We haven't been notified of any further apologies, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Forum membership changes.
Yeah,
I'll go through that, Paul.
Thank you. Yeah, no changes to forum to notify. We have gone through a recruitment exercise which hasn't provided us with the outcome we wanted. We still have vacancies, 3 vacancies for academy representatives and 2 for maintained primary. So we will write to head teachers rather than putting something in the bulletin. And I'm in discussions with Chris Kiernan, who's the council's head of schools, to get that process underway. So we're ready for the October meeting when, of course, we'll have the disaggregation votes. The only thing I did want to say is this is the first meeting after the election. We're joined by Councillor Fiona Baker, who is the observing portfolio holder for children's services at West Northamptonshire Council, who you will obviously know from forum days at Northamptonshire County Council, but also joined by Councillors Louisa Fowler and Danielle Lister, who are assistant cabinet members to Councillor Baker.
Welcome. Thank you. Anyone want to declare any interest? Presumably no additional declarations. No, good. So I'm now going to hand over to Paul.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So first item, as this is the first meeting proper of the West Northamptonshire Schools Forum, we're no longer in shadow form. We do need to appoint a chair and vice chair. As you know, Peter was chair of the shadow forum, but the law as it stands means the chair can't preside over their own election. So if Peter wants to put himself forward, he can't chair this item. So can I ask if there are any nominations for the position of chair for the forthcoming year, please? And
I'd say I'll be delighted if anybody wants to put themselves forward, given my struggles with Zoom this afternoon, but I will do it if you want me to.
Okay, I can't see.
I will nominate Peter, Kath Kitchen.
Oh, I thought you were going to nominate yourself then. I had a small amount of...
Not a chance, Peter. No.
All right.
Okay, do we have a seconder for that, please? Okay,
yeah,
Hayley.
Happily nominate Peter.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. Are there any other candidates? In that case, could forum members just show their hands if you're in favour of the proposal? Thank you. I will say that's carried, and I'll happily hand over to you. And I did warn you that it's harder to let go of the chair than it is to get it.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, so it is very new to me, this. I sort of was the person that last person to step back at the previous shadow thing, so you'll just have to bear with me with it a little bit, but we'll get there, I hope. A vice chair. Anybody want to do vice chair? Is there a vice chair sitting at the moment, Paul?
So I should just clarify that the yes and no. The vice chair is Vanessa Bradley, who is one of our 2 maintained primary school representatives, but Vanessa's advised me that at the end of this term, she'll be stepping down as a governor of her school. She would like to carry on forum as an academy representative, but we would need to go through the recruitment process in order to make that happen. So at this point in time, we don't have a vice chair.
Anyone want to do it? It's not terribly onerous. It's only if I don't show up, you have to do it. Look at them all. Shall we hold it over, Paul, then?
We can certainly hold that over until the next meeting, yeah.
Right. Excellent, thank you. Minutes of the last meeting on the 16th of March. Are we happy to approve these minutes as a true and accurate record? I take silence for assent. So I take it we are. Do you have to have formal proposers and seconders?
No, if you take the assent to the meeting, that's absolutely fine.
Yeah,
sure.
Brilliant, excellent, good. So we'll move on to item 6, which is the 2021-2022 DSG budgets and monitoring. And I think Beth is going to lead us on this.
Yeah,
Beth, are you able to share your screen, or do you need me to?
Yeah, it's letting me share it. That's fine. Thank you. Can everybody see the slides?
Yep.
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 So we've presented. Oops, sorry, it's jumped. Okay. So we're introducing a new format for the budget monitoring for 21-22. I think most of you are familiar with last year's way of presenting it, which was in 3 main blocks. This year, the main difference is that I've separated out into the 4 funding blocks so that you can see which budget is funded by which block. And where there are items that are funded by 2 blocks, there are little crosses that you can open the appendix with to see which part is from which block. But if you want the simplified format, you can close those groupings down so that it's more printable. We haven't got any significant variances showing at the moment because it's only to period 2. But obviously we're forecasting, we're aware of the high needs budget pressures, as always, in both the high needs budget and early years inclusion budget areas. So we're forecasting approximately 2 million deficit at the end of 21-22 in the high needs budgets. And we're expecting those to be within the same areas as for 2021, the special schools, the out of local authority, what we used to call the out of county, but we're having to call out of unitary or out of LA funding area, the alternative provision budgets, and also a smaller amount within the early years inclusion budgets. Within this presentation, I'm also bringing to you the results of a national study conducted by the Society of Treasurers, which confirms what we all know and what we talk about quite regularly at Schools Forum, which is that the high needs overspends are a national issue. And that the study made several recommendations to government, which I'll talk about later. Just thought I'd briefly put in there that we as an authority are in a much better position than many local authorities. But even though we're in that much better position, we are still working to bring that high needs budget to a balanced position. So apologies, I've got an extra column in there. I had a typo in the presentation that I've sent out, which said WNC, but it gave the Northamptonshire County Council full budget figures. So I've accidentally duplicated a column in here. We're trying to correct the WNC to NCC. So that was showing you the full 2021 budget figure. And then here in the columns to the right, I'm showing just the WNC 21-22 budget figure. So that's across the 4 blocks, which are shown in the detailed appendix. You can see the recoupment, which is for the academies and the high needs places. So that's in the mainstream schools, in the schools block. And for the high needs, which will show the alternative provision academy place funding and academies mainstream schools where they have the SEN units. So that gives us the local budget to devolve to schools of 129 million. So on 30th of April, the Society of County Treasurers issued a survey to all members of their society. They said we're interested in getting a more granular picture from LAs on current and projected DSG deficits. What's normally collected by the DfE is just the overall balance on the DSG. So that could include the ups and downs on the different blocks, but also any reserves held. So for example, we hold a PFI reserve. So the government only collects a single figure, but the Society of County Treasurers wanted to get a more granular picture to show that although we might be in an overall surplus because of reserves, the actual spend in year on high needs is in deficit for Northamptonshire and West Northamptonshire. We had 100% response rate and we submitted separate returns for West Northants Council and North Northants Council. The study's headlines were that although there was an increase in dedicated schools grant, which went up from 19 billion to 20.3 billion, an increasing share has been allocated to high needs. So that moved from 14.8% in 18-19 to 17.7% of the budget share in 2024-25. Funding is expected to increase for all blocks except central services because we have the historical reduction. So the part of the central school services block that's historical is reducing by 20% each year. The dedicated schools grant deficits are expected to reach 410 million in 24-25, a cumulative deficit of 1.84 billion. So there's a forecast that the total transfer from schools block to the high needs block, or from the central block to the high needs block, over that period would be 198 million. So if you remember, we're allowed to transfer up to 0.5% from the schools block to the high needs block, and there's no limit on the amount of the central block that we can move to the high needs block, but it has to be with consultation with schools forum members. So despite that increase in transfer, and despite that increase in funding that's being allocated to the high needs block, there's still a deficit forecast, and it's an increase in size each year. So as you can see in the cumulative terms, the high needs deficits have increased or are forecast to increase throughout the surveyed period at almost 750 million. And is forecast to triple to well over 2 billion by March 2025. Almost all SCT members saw an in-year high needs deficit increase between 1920 and 2021. I think the recommendations were really useful and spot on. They've said that there needs to be an alignment of SEND and funding policy and a consistent application nationally. They recommended reviewing the effect of the current Ofsted system, which doesn't incentivise schools to take responsibility for the needs of all children, as they're not held accountable for the children that they permanently exclude. And they say capping of independent school fees and review the parental option of school choices to prevent high cost places being the preferred choice, even though mainstream schools can provide the needed fraction of the cost. So in conclusion, Schools Forum are to note that the 21-22 budgets are in a new layout and shown by funding block, and that's how we'll go forward with monitoring those budgets, and also to note the information on the SCT study. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Beth, for that presentation. Anybody got any questions? Yeah, I can see Kath's hand up.
Thank you. It's not a question, thank you, Chair. It's just a comment that some of those recommendations that have been put forward by the Treasurers Group are what we're going to be expecting to see within the SEND consultation outcome, which has been delayed yet again. In our work that we're doing with the government, we know some of those things about the consistency across the country, and particularly about schools and their attitude to inclusion, to be contained in the recommendations in that paper, which might support some of those ideas going forward.
Thank you. I lost you a bit at the end. I don't know whether everybody else did or not. Paul got his virtual hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. My question is, and I don't know whether it can be answered today or whether it needs to come to the next meeting, but obviously SEND and high needs funding has been a constant issue around Schools Forum, Combined Schools Forum, and as we've spoken about nationally. Focusing just on where we are with the West, would it be possible, have we got data, or could we get data that show us in relation to out-of-county places, how many places within the West that we have available for high needs, what the requirement is within the West for high needs, and hence what the shortfall is for high needs? My understanding is the West actually isn't that badly provided for, so I'm quite surprised we're running quite the deficit. But do we have some information around that, or can we get that for the next meeting?
Yeah, I'll work to get hold of that for you. It's probably better for somebody from the service to respond to that question as well at the next Schools Forum meeting. But I understand that although the numbers are useful, it's not always just a numbers game. It can be about the right provision in the right place. But yeah, we'll try and get those figures for you for next time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? I just have one that's kind of related to Paul's question, really, but it's with this out of LA placements for kids with special needs. Is Northamptonshire now out of LA? Yes, that's right. Yeah, we have a border now. Yeah. and I mean, I know in the past that's sucked up a lot of funding, hasn't it? Is that is that still the case in terms of out of LA? There's an adjustment, so it can look as though it's sucking up funding, but there is an import-export adjustment. So there's a calculation done to see whether we're a net importer or exporter, and the only place where that isn't corrected for is within alternative provision. So for some reason, the government don't look at the alternative provision places within that calculation. But yeah, we're doing analysis and study on what that border means for imports and exports. Yeah, I think that'd be really helpful going forward. Thank you. Anything else? No, thank you very much. Beth, although it's time for you again, I notice items. The out-term report and DSG if available. Thank you. Yeah, I've got two for you. I've got the schools and the out-terms at the DSG separately. So if I start with the schools balances report. So this starts with a DSG overview in case I didn't have the full DSG slides for you, which I do have today. So I'll pass forward the first few bullet points there. The individual schools balances at the end of 2021 for North and West Northamptonshire maintained schools totalled 18.9 million at the end of 2021. As compared to 14.4 million in 1920. And that's across 116 maintained schools. The individual school balances for just West Northamptonshire Council were 9.9 million as compared to 7.9 million in 1920. We had and that's across 73 maintained schools. 4 of our schools in the West were in deficit at the end of 2021. As compared to the same number, though a couple of the schools were different,
in 1920. The total deficit value was 180,000, so slightly more than the 80,000 in 1920. The Schools Forum decides on the Maintained School Balance Control Mechanism, which sets out the criteria against which schools can retain balances. That should say NCC, sorry, got a typo there. The NCC policy was that there should be a clawback of excess uncommitted balances above 8%. We're proposing this year to ask for a vote to change that to 10% due to the COVID and grant funding provided towards the end of 2021. We only have 2 schools which are above the 8%, and they're only above it by a small amount, 8.6% and 8.9%. But we're requesting that Schools Forum maintained members agree and vote on the 10% threshold so that we don't claw back funding from any school in this unusual year. So the balances are reviewed, and if within the school carry forward policy that we're requesting you vote on, they'll be automatically carried forward into 21-22. Maintained schools submit an analysis of their year-end balances, which are checked and loaded by the school's financial advisors and loaded onto the system in June. The returns show the purposes for which those funds are held, and they're put either into earmarked specific purposes, i.e. committed, or non-committed, uncommitted budgets. Individual school balances, as I've said previously, total 9.9 million across 73 maintained schools, comprising 5 nursery schools, 65 primaries and 3 special schools. Of the 9.9 million, 4.5 million is committed and 4.5 million is uncommitted. In overall terms, the maintained school balances have increased by 2 million in the West between 1920 and 21. And this is seen in the committed revenue of 1.7 million, uncommitted revenue 0.5 million, and decreases in capital 0.1 million and community focused grant. The following slides provide this information over the 4 main areas: capital, community focused, committed and uncommitted. Academies report their year-end position and reserves through their statement of accounts, and they're published at the end of the financial year, August, and are on their individual or trust websites. I have been asked previously to bring back academy balances information, and I haven't got it in this slide pack because it's only just been provided to me. We've had somebody working on that for the last couple of weeks. And verbally, I can say that of the 21 academies that we have in the West, there was an unrestricted balance reported of 3.78 million. Of those 21, 13 increased their unrestricted reserves between 2019 and 2020. 1 remained the same and 7 decreased their balances. But all of those changes, apart from 1, were within 50,000, so not large compared to their budgets. The academy trusts, there are 24 academy trusts which cover 326 academies. So they're not all within West Northamptonshire, so it's harder to make a comparison. But of those academy trusts who do have West Northamptonshire schools, their unrestricted reserves total 40.5 million. And only 2 of those reduced their reserves between 2019 and 2020. So just a note there to say that we adjust the prior year balancing figures to remove any academies that have converted between 1920 figures and 2021 figures, so that they are comparable figures for our existing maintained schools. So you can see here that the capital balances, an overall small reduction of 10,000. The committed revenue balances, so there'll be sort of ring-fenced grants and funding of that nature. There's an increase of 1.72 million. A small decrease in the nursery sector, what's significant for them given that they're a small number of organisations, 130,000 decrease. Pupil premium grant is within those maintained school balances, but I thought it was useful to show the show this separately, which isn't something we normally do. But because of the COVID year, it's been difficult for schools to spend all of the grant funding that they've received. So I thought it was useful to show that some of the increase in the committed balances are due to pupil premium grant. So here it shows there's an increase of 280,000. And then I've shown the COVID grants, an increase there of 430,000 overall. And again, pupil premium, at PE and sport grant pupil premium, 160,000 increase. The overall uncommitted revenue balances, we've got an increase there overall of 4.48 million, a movement of 510,000. So total maintained school balances, 9.9 million, and it shows you there it's split out across the sectors, nursery, primary and specials. So there's been a reduction overall of the funding within the nursery sector, the 5 schools that we have there, of 390,000, an increase of 2.38 million in the primary, and a small reduction of 30,000 in the special. So in reviewing the deficits in schools, school deficits occur where there's a negative uncommitted revenue balance. So we're only looking at that uncommitted section. It can be due to a number of factors. A significant factor is the falling pupil numbers, resulting in a reduced budget allocation, as pupil numbers is the key driver for school funding. Although schools are autonomous bodies to the local authority has continued to increase the accountability and reporting requirements on schools in deficit. Schools with deficits will be required to reduce their expenditure in order to pay back the deficit in the next financial year. And all schools in deficit are required to submit a financial recovery plan, and progress against that is monitored by the school, its governors and our school's financial advisors in schools finance, and where relevant, the school effectiveness team. The number of maintained schools in deficit at the end of 2021 were 4, which represents 6% of maintained schools, the same number of figures as in 1920, and the total individual value of that was 180,000 by the end of 2021. We're working with those schools on financial recovery plans. And assuming maintained individual school budgets in 21-22 of approximately 63 million, the total deficit is relatively small at 0.3% given the total maintained school funding. So just a few slides to show the numbers of academies and maintained schools within West Northamptonshire. So 73 maintained schools and 111 academies. So if possible, could we have a vote now from the maintained school members on accepting a 10% uncommitted balance level?
So I think, Chair, that's just John Lake.
Oh, just John Lake?
Yeah.
Well, let's see if there, before we get John to say whether he agrees with it or not, shall we just check if there's any questions for Beth on that presentation from anybody? No, I can't see that there is. John, if you're there, are you up for that?
No pressure. Yeah, I'm happy to vote for that.
Thank you.
That's the power, eh? Thanks very much. We'll move on to the next item then, which is 2021-2022 grants.
Right, sorry, I've got the DSG outturn now.
Oh, right.
which is, sorry, it's the second part of that.
Ah, okay.
I wasn't sure it'd be ready, but we have got it finalised now. So the DSG outturn for the financial year ending 31st of March 2021 is an overspend of 3.66 million against the budget of 647.5 million, or 0.5%. This is an unfavourable movement of 40,000 from the position reported in March 2021. The 2021 deficit will be financed by a 2.73 million planned contribution from the 2021 DSG budget and growth fund recoupment for refund from 2017-18, and the remaining 2 million from 21-22 high needs budget of West Northants Council and North Northants Council. That's our sort of recommended and available funds that we will be financing it from. But obviously, this is from a West Northamptonshire Council view. This is where we will be funding it from. The net position, including the carried forward commitments, reserves, and in-year outturn for West Northamptonshire Council and North Northamptonshire Council combined, was an overall DSG surplus of 6.1 million at the end of 2021. And as a result, there's no requirement from the DFE for a deficit recovery plan. Details of the variances and 2021 DSG budgets, including carry forwards, are shown in Appendix A. So by summary, you can see that the outturn variance for the schools block is 187 underspent. We were forecasting 399,000. The high needs block has moved to 4.83 million overspent from 4 million. The DSG grant is 986, nearly a million underspent, and we haven't predicted anything or reported anything at the March budget monitoring. So the carried forward committed balances are 6.3 million, and the reserve for the PFI Waldale, which sits within the West, is a total surplus DSG balance at the end of 2021 of 6 million. So the in-year deficit of 3.656 million is shown there in the middle, and after reserves and carried forward balances, we're in a surplus of 6 million. The schools block outturns an underspend of 190 million, which has moved due to school rates on academy conversion. We claw back slightly more from academies because of the amount that we've given to maintain schools than the government take from us. And it's a small difference, but we make a gain there into the schools block, which will then form part of the overall DSG balance. There's a recoupment on converters rates of 20% by government. There's also a minor variances under 100k, not reported here. The carry forwards for the schools block are the growth fund underspend of 3.3 million, which includes the 2.7 million earmarked to offset the high needs overspend. There's new growth identified within the West, which was identified by the place team after the budget setting for 21-22 was finalised. So the full amount will need to be fairly split between North and West. We can't just give 300k to the West and not do the same for the North. So using the disaggregation principles, the remaining growth fund will be split and provided to West and North. The de-delegation carry forwards are also there. They're obviously ring fenced because they've come from schools' budgets, maintain schools' budgets. So for school improvement grant, redundancy and the trade union, overall there's a carry forward of 780,000 there. School standards and effectiveness vacancies of 371,000. Work was due to start on that, and there's been that's been put on hold during COVID, and so that's to be carried forward to continue that work. The significant changes from period 10 are due to the de-delegated redundancy previously shown as 0.2 million. So that's now committed to be carried forward, so shown as a nil variance, and then other minor variances under 100k. The early years block provisional outturn is a balanced position as per the reported position in March 2021. It's a bit of an unusual one, this, because of the COVID situation. LAs are able to fund nurseries who have had reduced claims due to COVID, whereas normally the funding formula has to be set before the end of March the preceding year, but those rules are relaxed in 2021. So all grant from 2021 that's underspent will be subject to final calculations. The intention is to make sure that that is paid across to nurseries that have lost out due to the COVID lockdown. So there's work undergoing to look at what that will be, and it makes sense to do that once we've received the final DSG adjustments for 2021, which we're expecting towards the end of July. So the variations to the budget that are shown are as follows. There's an overspend on earlier staffing budget relating to the redundancy and pension strain costs from restructure from the prior year. And then early years inclusion fund and DAF, there's an increased demand for that of 331,000. So looking at the high needs block, the provisional outturn is an overspend of 4.8 million, which is an unfavourable movement of 820,000 from the position we reported in March. The total variations in the high needs block are due to increased demand for high needs places as follows. SEN units has an underspend of 400,000. The high needs out of county budget is overspent by 4.6 million. Provision for pupils with SEN within schools, it's an underspend of 970,000. Alternative provision is underspent by 400,000, and sensory impairment provision, a small one of 67,000. So within the high needs block, there are quite a few changes from period 10, so I thought it was easier to present them in a table. Partly this is to do with committed balances being carried forward, and also additional provision due to increased demand for places. So the DSG carry forwards are listed here from 2021, and this is shown as a total for the whole of Northamptonshire. I won't go through each one of the balances, but you can see them there. And then on the next slide, they're split out based on the disaggregation principles, which is related to the funding that we receive for North and West, and split out the share for North and West on the right hand side. So just a few slides to reiterate that we have significant high needs budget pressures. The in-year spend for just the high needs block is obviously very significantly overspent, and it continues to be a concern. Additional high needs funding of 10.6 million was announced for 21-22 in December 2020, and our share of that was 6.5 million. 1.38 million of the increase in the high needs funding was earmarked within the West to cover the 2021 high needs overspend. So we're actually entering 21-22 with a balanced position, but our prediction for the overspend at the end of 21-22 would be if we receive equal increasing demand that we've seen as a trend over the last 5 years. Maybe it will level off, but we haven't seen that yet. So in conclusion, the net position on the DSG at the end of 2021 is 6.1 million. The 2021 high needs deficit to be carried forward is 4.8 million, to be funded by 2.1 million planned contribution from the DSG high needs budget and a growth fund of 2.7 million. The key pressures identified in 2021 and 21-22 budget setting process have been addressed as far as possible through budget increases from the additional grant received, and addressing high needs pressures remains the highest financial priority within the DSG.
Thank you. Anybody got any questions on that? Oh, John, looks like you've got a virtual hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Really a point about Beth, about the school support and effectiveness budget that we've got there. It feels like that's been there a long time, and I think certainly I know other members have made the point about actually getting that spent in a positive way. Certainly as primary maintained member, I think it would be nice to see by the time we get to this time next year. And I know COVID's been a real issue, but also, as I say, it's been there quite a while. It'd be really good to have spent that money in a positive way to support schools. So just to make that point, really.
Thank you.
I'm sure the point's been heard. If nobody else got anything, I've got a comment and a question. So my comment really is, I was at a school which I won't name yesterday, and they were being very complimentary about the financial support their bursar had from the local authority. So I just wanted to, Beth, if you could pass that on to people, I'd be very grateful.
Thank you. I will. Yeah, we have two very good, very experienced schools financial advisors, Charlotte Dennison and Andrea Bottrill, and I think they are quite often not talked about in this meeting. So it's really nice to hear.
I think it was the First Lady that was the name that they mentioned, but yes, please. My second question is, I'm a bear of little brain with finances, but if from what you've said, you're in an annual deficit almost of 3 million, and you've got 6 million in reserves, you're running out in 2 years' time, I reckon. So, I mean, is there any plans in place to ensure that we're not running out in 2 years' time?
Well, unfortunately, those reserves aren't spendable. The PFI reserve is a non-usable reserve, really. It's there to cover the end of the life cycle of the PFI. So that's a non-usable reserve. I think actually it runs out at the end of 21-22 if we don't start to look at.
Okay, so my question is even more urgent then. So, I mean, are there plans in place to ensure that we don't run out?
Yeah, there are, and I think really that's the service will be able to bring something to you at the next meeting.
Okay, so we'll have something at next meeting, because I think it will be wrong of us not to hear that addressed, because it is a concern that we're running out of money, basically. Okay, that's brilliant, Beth. Thank you.
Kathy has her hand up.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, Kathy. Hello.
Hi, Peter. Kathy Hadley, Joint Director of Children's Services. I just wanted to reassure you it's something that we definitely need to look at in terms of how we manage our budgets, but also how we manage things like our high needs placements, and are there things that we can do differently that can manage that going forward. So it is definitely a discussion we'll bring back to the forum.
Excellent. Thank you. Oh, Holborn House Day Nursery, which I think is right. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and Peter, I just wanted to add to was it Kathy that's just spoken? Whether that starts in early years, because we have we're the first point of call with where we see send paces going on to school. So actually, I think we could be of quite good use to you going forward, because we could give you an idea on placement numbers and things like that in the county.
Yeah. You're right, Chair, if I respond.
Please do.
Yeah. I see it as a whole system issue that we need to look at, and any work that we could do in that early years space to support what happens further downstream is very key and absolutely important. So yes, would welcome that.
Excellent. Thank you, folks. I see no more hands. So we do actually move on to item 8 now, which is poor old Beth again, telling us about the 2021-2022 grant. If she's there. Well, she doesn't appear to be. Paul, do you know where she may?
No, I don't, I'm afraid, Chair.
Shall we crack on to the next one and come back to it?
I think she may have just lost connection, so
right.
if she rejoins, I'll let you know.
So she's on next as well. So
just seeing if there's any other officers that can cover that one.
We're due after this item.
Emily, would you be able to do that?
Sorry.
I can take you through the slides briefly if somebody else is able to bring the slides up. Sorry, Emily Taylor, Strategic Finance Business.
Oh, sorry, Emily. Yes.
That's okay.
Just bear with me while I'm opening those slides.
Beth says you can try and log that in, but yeah, we'll delighted to have Emily present to us on that one.
Beth's just rejoining while I'm having difficulty with the slides. Let me just.
Okay.
These Zoom meetings are great, aren't
they? They are when they go well, yeah.
Sorry about that, everyone.
Emily was going to do it, Beth, but it's up to you. You can fight between yourselves as to who does it.
I think it would make sense for Beth to go through, but happy to step in if we lose Beth again.
Okie dokie.
Thank you. So this is a brief grants and funding updates for 21-22. The reason that I'm bringing this item is that we're basically told to in the Good Practice Guide for Schools Forum. So it's the responsibility of Schools Forum to inform maintain schools on when the central government will be paid to the schools, and that's what this presentation is for. So I've listed the grants, the largest grants that we devolved to maintain schools: the devolved formula capital, pupil premium grant, which is under various allocations given to us by government based on population from school census, and then also the looked after children's grant that's managed by the virtual school and the virtual school head Charlotte Franks, PE and sports premium, universal infant free school meals grant, and COVID catch-up grant. So this table is for information for maintained schools to see when the payments are due, when we'll be paying them out in the monthly transfers. Our aim is always to pay, we tend to receive the grant on the last day of the month, and our aim is to then put them in the next transfers out to schools. So the only other funding update I wanted to bring was that around the early years block, I'll just let somebody else in. So the final 2021 adjustment to the early years funding blocks for 2021 and then the indicative for 21-22 will be received towards the end of July. There's a change to the calculation of the final part of the 2021 early years grant, which was announced in March. The financial impact of COVID and a comparison to the DSG early years block funding allocations to the nursery providers will be finalised and brought back to a future Schools Forum meeting. So I think that sort of explains really why the early years, the gender item has had to be delayed, because we've got these kind of calculations coming. So it doesn't make sense to give you an update on those figures until we've got the final position. So this is a bit of detail on what the change is for the early years block. Normally there would be January preceding the financial year would set the funding for the first 5 months, and then the January within the year would set the final 7, so the census, the early years census would then set the final 7 months of grant. But that final 7 months of grant, we're not notified until after the year end in the July following. So we always have to make an estimate of the accruals, and we'll try and work out what that will be for trying to set the funding for the following year. There's a change due to COVID. Initially, it was that the January 2020 census would set the first 9 months of the year, and that then for the final 3 months of 2021, it would be based on January 2021. But to try and help LA's local authorities with the COVID kind of ups and downs due to the COVID lockdowns, they've said that what they will do is that they will start to base, they'll pay for the summer and autumn terms based on January 2020 census, but for the 2021 spring term, there's a chance of a top up if the numbers have fallen by 85% between the 2 Januaries. So I've put the details there. It's a bit of a headache for calculation and probably more detail than you need, but I just thought it was useful for you to see. I've added further appendices with a bit more detail for maintained schools to see when we'll be paying and what the rates are. So I don't need to go through all of those. That's really just for reference, to have a guide for schools to go to for all the different grants.
Okay, thank you very much, Beth. Anybody got any questions on that, on future funding? And we'll look forward to hearing the early years one in the next meeting. Right, okay, my agenda now says break 10 minutes. So I think we have a 10-minute comfort break, and so I reckon it's around about 3 o'clock. So can we try and come back to about 3:10? Is that all right, folks? Okay.
Sorry, Chair, as we're still live on YouTube, because members just turn their cameras and microphones off, and then we'll see you all at 10 past. Thank you.
Right. My phone says it's 3:10 now, but I can't. Oh, there's one or two people popping up now, having spoken. I can't see Paul. Presumably he's taking the minutes. Yeah.
I'm doing the minutes, Chair. So.
Oh, even better. We can crack on. Right. Sooner we start, sooner we'll finish. We're not doing early years single funding formula. That's been held off till the next meeting. But poor old Beth is on again. So Beth is going to talk to us about the scheme for financing schools.
Thank you. It's just a short one. And again, it's something that we have to do. I'll just showing those slides. So as a new council, we need to adopt and publish our scheme for financing schools, which applies to maintained schools. It sets out the financial relationship between the schools and the LA. The DfE published guidance that lists the provisions that we have to include. We can change that, but only if we do change that, we have to consult on it. Each year, the DfE will do updates that they call directed revisions, and so we should be annually updating and changing to include those. I've done a link there to the formula guidance on the scheme for financing schools. So in making any changes other than those directed revisions, local authorities must consult all maintained schools in the area and receive approval of members from Schools Forum. We're proposing to adopt the DfE scheme with no changes at this point. So we're not doing a full consultation, we're just bringing it to Schools Forum to have it formally adopted. We publish it on our website, which at the moment we have still the old websites, which we're publishing joint documents between West Northamptonshire Council and North Northamptonshire Council, but there is a programme in place developing the new separate web pages, and eventually we'll move this onto there. But at the moment, that's the link is provided in the slides that takes you to the web page where we've published West Northamptonshire Council scheme for financing schools. We also, in the County Council, had a financial handbook which gives more of a financial regulations kind of expansion on the scheme for financing schools. And we'll be going gradually through those to update those and working with the departments that they sort of link to, like the capital team or tax team and property teams. And we'll let schools know as each one of those sections are updated. So the contents of the scheme are listed there. It's about financial controls, treatment of surplus and deficit balances, which I've pre-written at being 10% on the assumption that you would have voted and agreed it. So fortunately you have. Instalment of the budget share, banking arrangements, taxation, repairs and maintenance, insurance, and this kind of financial issue. So the remit of the scheme is it applies to all of our community, nursery, voluntary foundation and special schools maintained by West Northamptonshire Council. It doesn't apply to schools outside of the authority, and it doesn't apply to academies. So in conclusion, our new scheme for financing schools has been adopted as of today.
Thank you. Do we need to approve that as a forum, or do we just note it?
I think you do. It's just for information, just for noting, really, because it follows the recommended scheme on the government web pages. But okay. Perhaps Francis can comment to make sure that we're right. Are you there, Francis?
Sorry, yes, yes, you're right. Yeah.
Great.
Okay, brilliant. Any questions on that from anybody? I think that is Beth's last presentation of the meeting. So just can I thank you for all your presentations, Beth. Sometimes I have to do these presentations and one's enough for me. So having done all that, thank you very much. So very clear. We're going to move on to the school apprentice levy update now, which I think is Vicky or Kerry?
Yeah, no, it's me. Kerry, unfortunately, is training today. So, so yeah. So if I could actually say hello to the forum, because I started on the 20th of April, hence why this is a bit of a, we're looking at our strategy on how we work with schools and trying to make sure that the schools actually maximise the apprenticeship levy which is available to them. So if I just share my screen. So yes, so we are looking at how we are going to work with the schools at the moment, because obviously we just started working West Northamptonshire as well. We are actually hosted by the North. So at the moment we have approximately 1/3 of the schools engaged. But this means there's 25 schools out of a possible 62 that we could be working with. So obviously we want to make sure that we include them all. At the moment for the West, we have 47 members of school staff who are actually apprentices. And we feel that we could possibly increase that a bit more. So at the moment, the West are paying about £32,000 into an apprenticeship levy pot, which is then available for people to use to pay for apprenticeship training. So that means that actually where we have people within schools who are looking to maybe move on to MBA or gain degree level qualifications, they're advanced teachers and advanced senior leaders, they can actually do that without any cost to the school for the financial training side. What we do have to be aware, and is a possible blocker for schools, is that if it's a new employee they take on, it is obviously an increased salary cost to the school because it's a new employee. So we are aware of that. Now, if schools are looking at possible vacancies, which they could employ as an apprentice, it does help for the salary cost saving, because it's 70% of what the normal salary would be for a qualified person. But in addition, at the moment, the government are actually funding, paying an employer incentive of £3,000 per apprentice. And that is available until the end of September. So obviously we're wanting to try and work with schools fairly quickly to see if they have vacancies available now, which would be suitable for an apprenticeship. Not easy, given that it's obviously the summer holidays coming up. So I think what we're looking to do with the schools, certainly up until October half term, is look at where is their greatest needs. Where can apprenticeships support them the most, and where do we need to set our strategy to make sure that we can help support in a meaningful way? I mean, the use of apprenticeships is massive. It can be used in a number of ways. So again, it's about, is there succession planning that needs to take place now for in the future, or are there hard to fill vacancies that the schools have been trying to recruit into for quite some time that we can help them? In terms of the support available from us, we certainly have funding incentives available. We certainly have a dedicated apprenticeship person to this, Kerry, who very much is actually involved in the Children's Directorate. So she has a great understanding of what the schools are doing, how the apprenticeships can support them, and what the added benefits could be. So I think for those schools representatives who are actually in the forum today, I'd be looking at what is it that prevents you from using apprenticeships in your schools? How can we get the message out there to the greater audience that we have this available, so you can actually access training which does not cost the school? And secondly, obviously now is the wrong time to potentially be trying to get apprenticeships in unless there are hard to fill vacancies still available that you need for September. But normally the school planning time is kind of January to June to prepare for the following September. So how can we support you? Can we start discussions at some point soon? And how can we help you to support the opportunities that are available and recruit and actually support your recruitment? Because we can offer that as a full service as well. So really, is there anybody that would like to meet with us to start discussing where your needs are the greatest, so we can start formulating the strategy and really start gaining feedback from the schools as to how you want us to do this? I don't want to be somebody who just goes out and advertise every single apprenticeship that's available. I would like to do this on a sensible strategy-based method of working, really.
Okay, anybody want to take up that offer? Oh yes, Paul has got his hand up, virtual hand up.
Yes, I just want it is available to academies as well. Yeah, most definitely. If
yeah, it is fully funded for all maintained schools, but we are happy for academies to join cohorts of learners. So we will do the majority of the procurement for them as well. The employer incentives are available for the academies as well.
Yeah, I'd like to have a discussion around that. If either we can reach out to you or you can drop us a detail and we can set something up with my HR team and payroll team.
Lovely. Yeah, I'll make contact with you then, Paul.
Thanks.
Anybody else? Just a thought from me. I realise you want individual things rather than pushing it out, but I think we're a relatively small body, and I think getting the information out there to schools that you're available will be very useful. And I suggest, not now, but perhaps in September, if you could send something out to bursars at schools, because I think the trouble is sending it out to heads, it gets lost in a...
Yeah, I think most of our past contacts have been with the bursars.
Yeah.
And they're kind of, we need the head to make the decision over this, and that's where it tends to start to lose traction. So that's where I'll certainly try again. But it would be interesting if there's ever the opportunity to have this debate of how do we reach the decision makers to make sure that they are taking this.
Well, the other option that occurs to me is, if I'm sure the local authority has such a thing, if you have a list of chairs of governors, it might be worth sending it to them.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, anybody got any further comments on that? Okay, thank you very much, Vicky. We're now going to turn to a discussion of whether we do this remotely or not, and whether your chair can cope with it or not, and Paul's going to lead us on that.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just share the presentation. Okay, can everybody see that?
Yep.
Yep. Okay, good. Excellent. Thank you. So as members may or may not be aware, there's various legislation enacted in the past 12 to 18 months in relation to remote meetings. Some of that legislation has expired, so the legislation that covers local authority meetings. Some of the legislation that relates to things like school admission appeals is due to expire in the autumn. But in the case of Schools Forum, the legislation has been enacted on a permanent basis. So I think feedback from schools forums across the country was generally positive. And so the government has enacted legislation that allows schools forums to meet remotely, as we are today, on a permanent basis. So I'll assume that members have read the presentation. It's fairly brief. The rules relating to meeting remotely means that we have to make sure that the meetings are accessible and open to the public. So that means either allowing the public to join the meeting by sharing the Zoom or Teams credentials, or streaming the meeting live to YouTube as we are today. I think anecdotally, based on experience so far, the attendance at forum has generally been good. We haven't had any issues with quorum since we've been meeting remotely. We haven't formally sought feedback from members, although today's meeting would form part of that. But generally, it's worked well, and I think should forum decide to continue to meet remotely, then aside from the benefits in terms of cost and our green credentials and carbon output from not having all those extra car journeys, there are possibilities to improve engagement and for non-forum members to see the forum and see how forum works, and participate or observe more easily than they otherwise would do. So really it's just to get a view from forum members as to whether you wish to continue to meet remotely. You may take a vote on the issue if you want to, but depending on whether members can reach a consensus without needing to do that, that's absolutely fine.
Thanks, Paul. Anybody got any comments? Oh, yes. Holborn House Day Nursery. Yeah. There's a comment.
I mean, I've been on forum for about 4 years now, and I can see the benefits of meeting remotely, and it's really convenient. And if there's a majority, I'm sure I'm more than happy to continue with that. But I think those new members who haven't had that feeling of being together and sort of, I don't know, there's the sort of a bit of it's not as social, and it's kind of, and I know it's not for social purposes, but certainly meeting in person helped to build my confidence up, to be able to talk to you guys. And I think you can quite easily blend in the background, especially if you're new, you can blend in the background, during these meetings, and maybe not have that confidence to speak up and things like that. So I think, having that physical contact does support. So whether we could potentially do a mixture of both, or it's just my opinion.
Thank you. Councillor Baker.
I was going to, I appreciate fully that I'm just a guest. I was only going to put forward a suggestion, because I agree with our previous speaker that the social aspect of us all actually getting to know each other is not happening on these remote meetings. And I was going to put forward a suggestion that we had at least one meeting in person a year. But that's just a thought that you can consider. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. It's a very helpful suggestion. Hayley has her hand up.
Yeah, I was gonna. We all chimed in at the same time. I was going to say the exact same. I think that at least one a year, and I think as we move towards this end of the financial year, those meetings seem to be quite heavy and a bit longer, and I find those the hardest. And you just don't get those other conversations around points that make and help me understand more. So I sometimes find the virtual ones that sometimes I'm a bit lost. So at least one in person, I think, would be useful.
Thank you, Paul.
Yes, I'd agree with that. I think there is a benefit to the remote meetings that we've had, and not least of which because we were getting a bit squashed together the last physical ones. But it's also that blend of having that face-to-face meeting for one of them, I think, is certainly helpful, either towards the end of the year when the agenda's a bit heavier, or at the start of it. So we all get to know each other again before we launch into remote meetings. So effectively concurring with colleagues.
Thank you. Any other comments or thoughts from anybody? Well, it sounds like the consensus is that we have one face-to-face meeting a year. That sounds like what people are suggesting. Shall I suggest from the floor, from the chair, whatever it is, perhaps if we have the October meeting face-to-face, because we haven't done that for a long time, and then perhaps look to have December and January, when it's colder and darker, as virtual meetings. How does that sound to people? I'm getting general nods. Boris says we'll be all right in the autumn, so I'm sure he's right. Oh yeah, got a thumbs up, good. So, yeah, more thumbs up. So, Paul, is that okay? Can we go for that then?
Yeah, that's fine. And I'll liaise with you, Chair, over a venue. So obviously now with the West Northamptonshire Council, we've got a somewhat broader spread of potential meeting venues that we could use.
Yes. And perhaps we need to think about a venue that's slightly bigger so we can space ourselves out a bit more if we have to social distance a little bit at that time. Yeah. Brilliant. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So next item is the forward plan of meetings, which you can see in front of you. So the idea is that October the 19th will be face-to-face, and then the following 2 or 3 will be virtual. Okay. I've received no other urgent business, unless Paul has, or anybody has any other urgent business.
No urgent business, Chair.
No, brilliant. So thank you very much for your attendance this afternoon, and I look forward to seeing you all face to face. Goodness me, we'll see we all have legs in October. Okay, thanks very much, folks.
Thanks, everybody.